price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. That's the price you pay to pursue your dreams. Grinding every day to get that dream. Ain't no holding back until you get your shot. One day you're gonna open your eyes and be on top. Been playing this game since I was 10 years of age. I wanted to make my mark ever since my Pop Warner days. When I strapped that helmet, I'm knocking dudes into a blaze. A lockdown corner going all the way through 7th and 8th grade. Entering high school, I'm ready to write another page. Busting my ass and lifting weights. It's a much higher level, but I'm still making plays. No time to party or bask in my glory days. It's college preparatory classes every single day. Living my life with that singular goal. It's the fire inside that makes me whole. Looking in the mirror, my muscles swole. I'm on a mission, and I'm never gonna stop. When the ball's in the air like Sherman, I'm a hawk. And I promise I'll overcome whatever life throws at me. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ageless Movement Podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Wilman.
And I'm Sang Poinak.
And we're happy to have you here on a Sunday. So, today, what are we talking about, Sang?
Well, today we are going to talk about training in Scott's 50's.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell me what it was like to train in your 50s. Okay, so it was very interesting preparing for this podcast this week because, well, we got into some interesting discussions in preparation of this. So I am 51, and I can't say I've trained a lot in my 50s. I'd say the whole time I've been 51, we've been largely in shelter or not been able to go into a gym because of the whole COVID thing. And I've also been recovering from some injuries that I'm happy to report I'm getting over the injury that I've been rehabbing since February. So I'm feeling pretty good now. I just got to get over a little bit of tennis elbow and I'm ready to get back hard. So, which brings a good question. You know, we were kind of going back and forth and saying like, well, see, look at all the stuff you've had to rehab from. Okay, that's a good point. But let's be real. All my friggin' life, I've had periods where I've had to rehab things. I mean, going back to my early 20s. In fact, I think I had more injuries in my early 20s than I did, in my 40s.
But being in the pandemic has really allowed Scott to focus.
True. And yes.
Because if times were different, he would just keep training through his injuries. And he might do a couple things here and there. But now he gets to solely focus on his correctives.
I think that's a good point you bring up, Sang, because, if there's any of you viewers out there that are younger, my advice to you is this. Like, if I could talk to the younger version of myself going back to when I'm in my 20s, which would mean like the early 90s. Well, I was in my 20s all the way through almost the end of the 90s. 98. Anyway. Whole point is, I would tell my younger self, don't forget about symmetrical balance. And I don't mean that in the bodybuilder sense that you look in the mirror and you go, well, everything looks really good here. No, that's not symmetry. Symmetry is function. And I would definitely have a long talk with myself about symmetry and level of function. Because to be honest with you, there were times in my 20s where I struggled with shoulder injuries. And all of that would have been completely avoidable had I just done some basic shoulder maintenance. I could have avoided all of that, which is probably a total of 3 years of that whole decade I spent rehabbing shoulders, right? Just think of the gains I could have made in just that period. Anyway, so that's what we're going to talk about today is corrective exercise and kind of retooling your focus of training. Because for a lot of people, especially if you cut your teeth in the 90s, you probably were not taught, especially even worse in the 80s, you probably were not taught a lot on corrective exercise, because the way it used to be done, if you injured yourself, then you would just simply rehab from that injury and go right back to what you were doing before. But what you have to keep in mind is you have to always test yourself to make sure all of the following things are happening. Do you have good stability in the shoulders? And what does that really mean? Well, it also means range of motion, but what I like to refer to is range of stability. So what that basically means is, yeah, can I do this to here, get it in line with my head, but also am I stable in that range? It doesn't matter if I can passively stretch something. If I can't stabilize myself under any kind of load, then it's pointless to have all that extra range of motion. And that brings up something we've talked about quite a bit over the years, people that are hypermobile.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the risk factors that they have.
Yeah, I mean, so we actually kind of addressed this earlier this week in class with one of our students. I think depending on, like Scott said, depending on when you were training, like constantly going into that hyper range of motion or always stretching. I mean, like for years it was all about stretching. And that's kind of how, the only way you did things. A few of you guys who listen to this podcast probably know that normally after we stretch something, we activate in order to teach that muscle. After you've stretched it and released whatever it's been holding on to, you have to retrain the muscle to do the right motion. So, that is a far advanced thinking process. It makes sense, but I think for your general population, that just blows their mind because that's just not the way we've been doing it all this time. And like, for instance, I do I have FRC and kin stretch background, so like making sure that those joints can actually maintain and still move while still being in the proper space is something that's even harder to teach people if they don't really understand like what is proper being in the proper space. So that's something to really get. I mean, and even then it's body awareness. That one's another one that's really hard to teach people if they didn't grow up always having that sense of awareness, or at least recognizing how important it is, because even though you can point stuff out to people, if it's not important to them, then it doesn't matter. Well,
that's a good point you brought up, because I've realized over the course of all the years I've been teaching, and when I was playing football, I mean, naturally you have to move laterally. You have to be able to rotate. You have to be able to move explosively. You have to have stability, because you're trying to move a guy that possibly weighs more than you somewhere where he doesn't want to go.
Yep.
So you learn really how to move at all these different planes, and yet when I started working with people, I realized, wow, there's some people that only move in certain planes.
Yes. Well, that's what most of training is all about. I
Yeah.
mean, it's about getting bigger biceps, and so people do curls for days, but it's like there are other joints in your body and there are other muscles.
Yeah.
And in fact, yesterday I was listening to somebody that I had worked with where we talked about foot mechanics. It's like we talk about muscles all the time, but really it's how do our bones move?
Yeah, and that's the other thing, making sure that you can stack your joints as best you can. And I always say as best you can, because obviously there's some of us with structural issues, whether it was from an accident or from birth. You would definitely want to be able to put yourself in the best position for movement so you can avoid wearing joints out or even aggravating certain muscles. Now, I've always been very fortunate in my life. If I ever have a movement disorder, it doesn't really afflict itself in the joint so much it does the muscles that control that joint. So I'll get in a lot of pain and I'll get frustrated, why is this happening? And then I get another set of eyes on me and I realize, oh man, I'm not doing this right. And that's why, or maybe this muscle is too tight. Like for instance, I had been struggling with a hip injury, and ironically, it was right at the end of my rehab period for my left knee, which was my ruptured patellar tendon. And I'll tell you,
a year later.
Yeah, which was a year later. And I got to tell you, that last day of physical therapy, I kind of blew everyone's minds away because they're having me doing lateral jumps, right? My doctor told me I'd never jump again. And, I'm doing lunges, I'm squatting on an upside down Bozu ball with a kettlebell, I'm doing all this crazy stuff, right? And all the PTs are like, you're done with us. You knocked it out the box. And I'm telling you, it's like some funny joke from God, right? Because just as I'm walking out of the PT clinic, I'm like, why is my hip hurting so bad? Like literally, if it had just waited 10 seconds to hurt, I could have told my PT and we could have scheduled more sessions. Anyway, this lovely lady right here pretty much figured it out. I had a lot of, obviously, massage therapists working on it. And, ironically, you have to kind of, I always describe it as like trying to peel a banana.
Onions.
Or onions, I guess that's a better way to put it.
Scott doesn't peel onions.
That is true. I don't like onions.
So he doesn't know how many layers there are in an onion.
True. But it feels like there's that many layers in my hip and leg. But yeah, that's literally what it came down to. It first manifested itself as pain down my leg. And I'm thinking, my sartorius is tight, so I have the massage therapist work on that. And then my other massage therapist is like, your adductor magnus is pretty bad, which is inner thigh muscle. And then it's the hamstring, and I'm just, after a while, I'm like, what the hell's going on here? It's like every single muscle's taking their turns to hurt. Well, what that really means in a situation like this, like that particular situation, is there's always an underlying issue. And the underlying issue was tightness in a very, I would say, somewhat unusual muscle for most people. You have something,
common.
It's common though. It's basically, I guess they can see your hip. It's your psoas muscle, and it's basically two muscles. It's the psoas major and the iliacus, and they're basically two muscles that connect your upper body and your lower body. And the whole idea behind it is when you get tight there, it affects your hip. Now, a few times, massage therapists worked on me and nearly killed me working on those muscles. And then I'm seeing my physical therapist, and Sane happens to be there virtually. I literally brought her in the room with my tripod and my iPhone because you can't have multiple people in a PT clinic nowadays. And finally she looks at my PT and says, I think it's a psoas. And I'm sitting here going, well, it might be my psoas. And he's saying, well, let me rule out a few things, because one of the issues that I was running into was some of the muscles next to my knee. So going all the way down my leg, imagine, I'll point to this guy right here. You see right about that medial
the teardrop
condyle, yeah. Well, a little bit lower, it's actually on the tibia.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's right down there. And a lot of times, that's how meniscus, which is the cushion of your knee, will manifest itself pain-wise. But I knew it was not a meniscus injury because there's no way I could train the way I do if I had torn meniscus. That's not going to happen. So, the question was, what muscle is causing all these problems? So, my PT gave me a psoas stretch to do. My honey bunny got him really thinking about, how he should evaluate my leg, and he clearly didn't believe I had a knee injury, a meniscus injury. In fact, I believe the term they use is called pes insurinus, and all that simply means is in Latin it's called the gooseneck, and it's really like this whole area right where your lower leg meets the knee. That's like a conglomeration of nerves, of arteries, of muscles, all in one place. So it's very common to have pain around there, and it can really last for quite some time if you don't know how to treat it. So I started doing some of these psoas stretches, but one of the things that really made me realize it was a psoas stretch, my back was killing me. I had back pain and I never get back pain. I mean, this back pain was almost crippling at times. It only went on for about a week. And as soon as my massage therapist massaged it, I'd say 60% of the pain went away. And that's when I realized, Sane's right. She's right, my psoas is tight. So it's really interesting how algorithms work. on YouTube because it was a Saturday morning. We were here at the house, and I was looking through my YouTube page, and I'm not sure they call it a wall on YouTube, but it's like that in Facebook. So the algorithms recommend videos that you may want to watch based on what you've watched, previously. And all of a sudden, I see this doctor who's a sports medicine specialist, and he's got 3 ways to stretch your psoas. So I liked his way better than my PT gave me because my back was killing me. And normally what you do is you just lay towards the edge of the table and you let your leg drop and you put something under your back. And just the gravity pulling your leg down stretches that hip there, that psoas. Well, my back was hurting so bad, just for me to lay on the end was painful. So this doctor says if you're really in a lot of pain, let your leg drop off the side. I'm like, that's brilliant, because in the way he described it, you put something under your back, let the leg drop. Oh my goodness, it dropped better, it kept my back flat. So long story short, after about 3 days, that pain started to improve. That pain, in the inner part of my knee. And then after a week and a half, it was 80% gone. And then when I went back to the PT, I had good news to tell him, hey, this is really working, this psoas stretch. He's like, okay, great. And he tested me out, and clearly it was not a knee injury. And then I'm getting over this Pezzenzarinus injury. So I basically showed him how I was stretching it. And then he gave me a higher level way to stretching it where I have a green strap and I pull it over my shoulder while the leg's hanging, and it's kind of a quad stretch plus a psoas stretch. Anyway, long story short, I'm 98, 99, almost 100% better now. That was a lot. And I'm happy, and I'm doing deadlifts again and squats with a bar on my back, and I'm feeling normal in my lower body now. And I'm sure that if I had known what to do back in February, it wouldn't have been, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. Oh my God. It's like the better part of a year, right? I could have avoided that. I bet you I could have got over that in 3 months. The pain in a month, the rehab another 3 months. So this is what life is like in your 50s. In fact, it's probably like that in almost every decade. You have to rehab from things. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to just in recent months that have said, I have the same problem. My knee's killing me. I'm like, you sure it's your knee? And I start poking around. It's not your knee, it's your leg. Here's some stretches you can do. So I think there's a lot of people that get in those situations. And I think the misconception people have that are out there watching right now is that if you're in really good shape, you never get hurt. And that's a bunch of malarkey, right? Yeah, anyone gets hurt. In fact, people that work out a lot of the times get more injuries because we're pushing ourselves hard. So that's what life has been like for me in my 50s training. It's been bizarre. It's been training in a pandemic, not in my usual setting, and having to figure out certain things, But I'm realizing that we have to work on all of this stuff. You have to make sure your spine rotates properly. You have to make sure you can move your shoulder blades properly. I know that sounds really funny, but for a lot of you, if you've had shoulder issues for a long period of time, you may not be able to depress your shoulders and retract them at the same time. It may be too painful. And those are all signs that you need to do corrective exercise to your shoulders. Same thing with your neck. Can you move your neck through all your different planes? Can you stack your joints properly under load? Those are all really important. Anything else you want to add to that?
Well, when you say under load, I wouldn't put too much load when it comes to my neck.
I'm sorry. I don't mean you should balance a motorcycle on your head. I did see a guy do that in Thailand once. Of course, I was not actually in Thailand. It was a YouTube video, but it was the craziest thing. I saw a Thai guy about the size of your father. He was about 4'8", probably
It's
way...
my height, 5 feet tall.
Oh, he's 5 feet tall?
Well, he used to be. Or
Oh.
he should be a little bit taller.
Okay, all right. This guy was probably shorter than your dad. He was probably about 4'8", about your height. And literally, this guy, I've never seen anything like it before. He couldn't have weighed more than 95 pounds. They put a motorcycle on his head. Now, it might have been a moped, but the thing still had to weigh a couple 100 pounds. And he climbed this ladder all the way to the top of this motorhome with a motorcycle on his head. It's crazy. I'll try to find the video and post it in the comment section. Anyway, not trying to get distracted here. I'm just trying to point out, I would never recommend you do anything like that. You don't put anything on your head. However, when I say under load, I mean a bar on your back, a deadlift, a lat pull, anything you're doing where you're holding weight, you're loading your spine.
Yeah, but I mean, back to maybe some reality is that there are some people who do balance out of necessity and function things on their head. So you'll probably see like
Women in
indigenous
Africa.
people,
Yeah.
women in Africa will carry their baskets full of whatever they've been working on or whatever they're trying to sell. And they can do it perfectly fine. So there is some value to that, but if you've never really trained for that.
True, and also their alignment's almost perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like that Thai guy I saw with the motorcycle on, I mean, he could have been in the circus doing that, getting paid. It was totally balanced. I mean, it didn't sway any direction, and he gets all the way up to the top, and there's two guys meeting him, and they get it off his head. I'm like, I mean, you just figure things out when you're in extreme situations.
Yeah, but since we're talking about neck and also getting older, I would also say the other thing that we come across a lot is when people get older, they don't move their heads, and so the one time they decide to move their head, in fact, one of my instructor calls it being a tourist. The one time you ask them to look up, all of a sudden, everything goes haywire because they've never actually looked up. They've never like observed the world around them because they've always kept everything like right here. And I've actually seen somebody in a class basically completely lose it.
That's
like,
amazing.
Yeah, and it's somebody you know. So you really should, I mean, because that has to do with your inner ear, your vestibular system, it's a lot of things. So always having good range of motion, being able to move your head, turn, and we talk about it a lot. We talk about it more about turning so that you can drive. But the reality is also like for your vestibular system, and hopefully you never have vertigo, as one of our students told me I would never want to have vertigo.
I've had minor vertigo in my life. My father had it pretty bad where it lasted about 6 months. But you know, for me, sometimes I'll get a touch of vertigo, and it's probably mostly because of the fluid in my inner ear. When I'm about to get a cold, probably a semi-severe cold, I'll be laying on my back working with clients or whomever, and I go to get up, and all of a sudden the room does this, whoosh, whoosh, and I know, it's okay. I'm gonna get sick pretty soon. I could just tell.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's like that every time, but most of the time.
But head motion, that's why that's important. You don't want to end up with vertigo. You don't want to end up losing your balance because of it. So even though, like we're saying, don't load your neck, you still should move around whatever your range of motion is to avoid. It's just to move everything inside your head and
correct. And that's like when you do a somersault, you don't have someone put the weight on their head. You put their hands over their head to ease and then roll over. Yeah, it's interesting. So far for me in my 50s, it's been a lot of corrective exercise and rehab. I'm hoping though that's going to change pretty soon. But you know, here's the thing: I'm always going to have some degree of corrective exercise in my workouts, and I was doing it up until I was doing a lot of it up until I injured my hip. But the point is, it's hard to foresee every shortcoming you may have physically until it manifests itself in any particular way, like symptomatically. That's why it's good to every now and then let people observe your movement and try to put you on a path that will prevent problems. And I'm telling you, every year I'm alive, I learn a lot more about how to take care of hips or shoulders or necks, feet, everything. It's all very important. I mean, you need all your parts.
Yes.
That's the takeaway from the show today. You need all your parts.
Well, I think usually the common thing when something hurts like that, people are they're just going to lay off of it, is what they say. So let's not do that. Let's not bend my knee. But then if you don't bend your knee, you end up changing your gait cycle, which then causes a whole different issue. Like we work with people who've had strokes. So If you want to see, we have a pretty good idea what happens if one whole side decides it's not going to work for you. So for those who are healthy enough to figure that part out, like you just slowly work your way back to normal rather than I'm done. Like I just won't use that joint, because we have a few people like that in class who I don't want to load my wrists. I don't want to bend my knees. I can't remember all the issues.
It's a tough thing, to be honest. I've known people that, for different reasons.
Yeah.
And then I say for different reasons, can't bend their knees under load. And obviously for some people, they've had meniscus issues where they've just worn their bone on bone and that cushion in their knee is gone. And then I've had other people that have not had knee replacement, that maybe don't need knee replacement, but because they felt some pain under load when they bend, they just won't do it anymore. And it's crazy because it's probably a functional problem that can be fixed. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes I'll tell people, let me see your squat. I'll ask them, just squat as low as you can go. And oftentimes I'll see a very shallow squat, mm-hmm. but all the bending's in the knee and not in the hips. Mm-hmm. And that's the main thing. It's probably the toughest thing I teach people. Yep. And it isn't just older people.
Yep.
It's people in their 20s I've worked with that don't know how to use their hips.
Yep.
So it's amazing, and it's quite something when the light bulb goes on and that person that you're working with just realizes, oh my goodness, that's bending, squatting from my hips. That's how I'm supposed to do it. Because usually what will happen before that is they'll explore their range of motion. They'll start to get into their hinge. They'll start to hinge, and they won't, because they've never done it before, or at least they haven't done it since they were a kid. Their weight starts to go backwards. And they start, the toes come up and they start to roll backwards. Then I grab them, no problem. All right, try it again, but bring your torso slightly forward. And then the look on their face like, oh God, I should have been doing this all my life, right? My knee, and I asked him, did your knee hurt? No, didn't hurt at all. That's because you used your hips. And those are things that so many of you that are suffering from pain don't understand. Just changing your movement a little bit can go a long way.
And I know, like, my very first client, when he came to me, he was like, I have to be able to use my hips because I can't cut my toenails. And that, I always think of him all the time, especially when I read about how important hips are for mobility, especially as we get older. Earlier this year, I worked with somebody who basically spread physical fitness across maybe Southeast Asia. I believe that was his story. The government basically gave him this program, and that's the one thing we talked about a lot was hip mobility. I think all of us lose it because we sit in these conventional chairs, and he talked about it, and I remember showing him a picture of my grandmother who is in her 80s sitting on the floor in what we call 90-90 position. Yeah. So basically, with one leg forward and the other one behind. So, that's basically what I always try to think of. Like, okay, the goal is if my grandmother could do it when she was 80, I should be able to do it. I have my own hip restrictions, but I still try to work at it as much as I can.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's just one area that needs to stay mobile. Because once those things lock up, they start locking up in different areas. And the thing like Scott was saying about squatting, actually, it's 3 joints that work in the squat well, and it also does include shoulders, but from everything below, it's hip, knee, and ankle. They all have to move roughly at the same time. So it's also a timing issue.
Yeah, and that's a good point you just brought up, because the first time I teach somebody how to squat properly, meaning how to hinge, you can almost see how their brain's working. Because the first thing they do is hinge their hips. They don't do anything yet. They just bring their butt back. Mm-hmm. Then they drop straight down. Mm-hmm. And then you can see them trying to get their ankles to work. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, you do that all at once. Yeah. As you bring your butt back, bend your knees, let it just drop into it. And you have to keep going over it again and again and again. Eventually, people pick that up, and it becomes natural. Mm-hmm. But you have to reprogram the movement, because you got to remember, somebody that's in a situation like that has not moved in the proper way since, I don't know, 2 decades. I mean, no one really knows how long it's been because I haven't observed that person for 30 or 40 years.
Right.
But who knows when it actually started? It might have started in their early 20s.
Yeah, it just kind of depends on your lifestyle and what you do day to day. So.
And most people in post-industrial America have work seated. Definitely. All right, so that's training in the 50s, for me.
So what was your breakdown? Because this morning I asked you the question, like what's going to change from here until you're 60?
I'd say for the moment is making sure I have flexibility in my hips. And to be honest with you, saying there were some hip exercises I had been doing for about 20 years that I kind of got away from because I was so knee specific during my rehab. And I sort of assumed that my hips worked really well. But it's interesting because during the whole entire time of my rehab with my physical therapist, Eric Kwan, by the way, Kaiser, I'm going to give him a plug because the guy's a really good therapist. And
he listens to us.
He does listen to us. Like, I'm sure a lot of therapists would be like, will you two shut up and just let me rehab you? He's great. The whole time he was always kind of, and he's not really pushy. He just kind of throws things out there. And he was always saying, you need to get more flexible in your hips.
Yeah.
And I'm
I
like,
remember that.
no, bleep, bleep, Sherlock. But I don't know how to do that. Like, I do couch stretches every day. I feel like I'm stretching them every day. But you know what? I wasn't stretching the psoas. And what he was observing, without even him fully realizing it, because you don't know just by simply looking at somebody. He could tell there's tightness in my hips, but he doesn't know exactly what the culprit of it is. I didn't know.
We've talked about it. We actually do know.
Now we know.
No.
You knew before my psoas was tight?
We've always known. So, this all comes from, one, this is why you needed to work on your big toe. Mm-hmm. Which we've addressed, which we may still be addressing. So you don't use your big toe because one of your, was it your left toe?
A left toe.
Has turf toe.
Yeah.
So this goes back to what I said earlier, is that when there's an issue, we just say, oh, I have this, I will not do this. But I mean, I've worked with a lot of people. Like one of the people I've worked with is Gary Ward, who basically wrote the book, What the Foot. And that's where we've talked about a lot about the big toe. And so I came back, I'm like, can we work on your big toe? Because I know that you don't use yours. And so over time, you've allowed your massage therapist to work on it.
And that was the beginning of something big, because I'll be honest with you, for years, all through my late 20s, into my 30s, I thought I had arthritis there. And then it occurred to me as I learned more over time, like the last half of the decade, I said, this can't be arthritis, because it kind of acts like muscle pain or fascia pain, the way it just kind of comes in waves and goes away. And that's when I thought, you know what? Now that I've recovered from those injuries at the time, why don't we focus on the toe? Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad, because the first few months my Phil Louie from SMI worked on that toe. I can't believe how painful that was. It felt like he was ripping my toe off, but it was the best thing because he broke up scar tissue and he taught me how to take care of it with a lacrosse ball. And from that point on, when that pain comes, I know what to do.
So basically how you drive into the ground with that toe shoots up.
Yeah, up the chain.
All the way up to the hip. And so...
True, but it was the right hip.
No, I know that, but it's your right hip that did all the work because your left didn't.
Yeah, correct. And then blowing my knee out didn't help at all, because then I'm hopping around on one leg for almost, however many months.
Yeah.
Right? And then I have to learn to walk again because there's too much weight on the right hip. So there you go. It was all building up. Mm-hmm. And this is pretty much what it's like for everyone. Mm-hmm. And I want you to know, not because I just like to babble, but because I want to help you.
Right.
That you can get over this stuff. It's not the end of the world. Don't assume it's arthritis. Don't assume, I'm too old now, I should be wheelchair bound.
Yeah.
Stop. Just reevaluate. Get somebody to look at it. It's worth the money to pay somebody to evaluate you. I do it, and I'm a professional.
Yeah. We see various people who have different specialties.
Because they're really good at what they do, just like we're really good at what we do.
Yeah, but overall, I think also we both have been injured at different points in our lives. I'll probably talk more about being 40. But with Scott, I mean, both of us I think you were within a week. I tried in the first week. I wasn't so successful. But literally a week after surgery, he's like, take me to the center to go work out. I'm like, excuse me? Like, I was freaked out. I'm like, okay, I don't know about this. But he did it. And and when you think about it, it made sense because it got your blood pumping and everything. And I mean, if you look at his scar on his knee, it healed. Like, it's amazing. That is clearly somebody who can take care of himself, and his body's taking care of him.
And that was part of my theory, was that I needed to eat properly. I needed to get my metabolic rate up. I needed to break down a lot of muscle tissue in my upper body because that's what I could train at the time. And just having that higher metabolism, having the to recoup from workouts, I knew would help, accelerate the healing.
Yeah.
That was my theory behind it.
The other part is that you didn't take any medication.
No.
So
yes.
There's no foreign objects or no foreign things really going in. He didn't take anything.
I didn't take any oxycodone.
His body, didn't have to deal with any of that. So that was awesome. I was the same way. I mean, I was given Vicodin. I couldn't even take half a pill. So then it was like, I guess I'm on my own when it comes to pain management.
Yeah.
And same thing, Scott, even though it took me 2 hours to get ready for work, he would help me with those 2 hours to get ready, take me in, and every day he'd kind of, do you want to do the board? Do you want to try to lift your arm? Okay. And then just slowly progress these things to the point that you're like, okay, your body's okay doing certain things. Not that I didn't have ghost pain every now and then, but I still did everything I needed to. I mean, I still had to perform in 6 months. So everything I had built up to went away after an accident, and I had to go find it again.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, because for about 2 weeks, you couldn't really move at all.
Yeah.
And then after that 2 week period, you were able to start moving again, and it's like you're starting from square one.
Yep.
Yeah. So anyway, have hope.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's ever, I think, final, and I mean, you'll know when it is final, but I think sometimes a lot of people give up long before, or they take whatever diagnosis they got from the doctor, and hopefully you got the diagnosis from a doctor and not from somebody else. So
yeah.
That's the other thing. It's not just, you don't go self-diagnose.
Yeah.
You go see a professional. If you don't like that answer, you can go seek a second opinion. Because I've been in that situation too, where I've had clients go and they're like, it just doesn't seem right. And I'm like, well, if you don't like that, then go find another doctor.
And I say the same thing with physical therapists, with students and patients of mine. Students and clients of mine. Yeah, go find a therapist you like. Because if you don't like your therapist, what's the point of working with him or her?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've found plenty of people maybe I don't care for, but if what they're saying is logical, then
just deal
I
with
need to just get past that.
Yeah.
But I mean, did you like what your surgeon said to you?
I liked that he was honest with me.
Yeah, but you didn't necessarily care for what he said to you.
No, yeah, he called me an old man and said I couldn't do the things that I was doing, and I proved him wrong, but I think that was good. I think it was good because it gave me a full dose of reality. So from that point on, I compartmentalized my whole perception of my recovery. And then when things started to really click and I could see the light at the end of the tunnel, I'm like, bitch, I could really make a full recovery. Right? So it was good because then I can look back on it with a major sense of accomplishment. So yeah, I mean, the guy was a fantastic knee surgeon.
Yeah.
Dr. Lowry's his name. If you're part of the Kaiser Network.
In Redwood City.
Yeah, in Redwood City, he's your guy with knees, for real. Anyway, so I think we should probably wrap things up now. Is there anything else you want to add, Say?
Nope, because we'll probably cover it on training in your 40s next week.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about rehab. And this is really a good scope to focus on because for most of us, we're always rehabbing from something. And I could tell, even people that I see out in public, they may tell you they're not hurt, but I could tell they're not walking like they're 100% functional. So something's bothering them.
And it's way better to go. I mean, that was a good part because with Scott's surgery, like he pretty much went in at his very best because he was training so hard. I mean, you were definitely doing, I think, a lot more than you were doing years before.
Yeah.
So you went in about the healthiest you could have been.
Yeah.
And your recovery was amazing. I mean, we have a lot of people who come in, they've never worked out before, and they're like, I'm having surgery. And it's like, oh, so we're going to work on prehab stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that you do that, and a lot of doctors will say, you know, you need to go do this for X amount of time, and then we'll have surgery. But it is way better to go in at your best rather than trying to go find it before surgery. It's
true. And then it just makes the recovery process that much quicker. Your body's going to recover quicker if it can repair tissue faster. It's that simple.
Yep.
All right, everyone. It was wonderful. Thank you for another wonderful afternoon on a Sunday. Please don't forget to like our video if you like it and subscribe to our channel and leave a comment. If you have a suggestion about what we should talk about in the future, drop a line. You know, maybe we'll do it. All right? Okay, everyone, have a great rest of your afternoon, okay?
See you next week.
Take care.